Hello, welcome once again to my channel, Research and Statistics. This is where we break down every component of academic research. We do a deep dive into what research writing is all about, the process, the protocol, and the procedure. Please join me today as we look at another very important topic on research and statistics.
All right, so we'll be looking at the guideline for crafting research questions and objective. And it's important to understand that this is often a little bit challenging area when it comes to academic writing from my personal experience as I interact with students. So we look at it in detail, how you could craft your research objectives, and then you come up with research questions. So it's important to mention that research objectives are usually crafted from our research problem. Okay, and from these research objectives, then we come up with research question. So as a way of highlight, we are going to look at the objectives, and then we look at the questions, and then we look at the best practice. The first question we are going to attempt is to look at the guideline on when to use research objectives. Of course, there are certain researches you conduct that you may not really use research questions and objectives. Okay, rather, in certain situation, you want to be exploring hypothesis testing. You are testing certain hypotheses. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at when to use this guideline. Number one is when we conduct our proposal development. When you have identified research problem and you are writing up your problem statements, that is the time we begin to think of research objective. It is from the research problem we generate our research objective. Of course, research is all about solving problem, and to set out to solve the problem is what informed the idea of designing objectives. Now, it's also important to note that research objectives are crafted before we start gathering our data. It is the objective that will give direction, a clear direction to the kind of data we are actually going to actually gather at the end of the day on the field. And also, the need for research objectives come up when we are to align our study design with our methodology. Anytime we have developed our methodology and we want to align the study design with it, then objective becomes important because the research questions will lead the direction. It will directly link us with the kind of data that we are actually going to obtain. So again, we look at how do we craft the questions. The principle that should guide crafting our question includes clarity. It must be clear. It must be devoid of ambiguity in the kind of language we use. Simple English is usually preferable, except if technical terms may be very important to drive home our point. Now, it should also be focused. Our questions should be focused, addressing specific problem, not too broad, and of course not too narrow. And it should be relevant to the study we are conducting. And again, feasibility is very, very key here. The research question must be answerable within an available time. If you are conducting maybe an undergraduate research, you look at the period of time that you have beforehand before crafting your objective or your questions. Or if you are into postgraduate study where you have probably more than a year to work on the field, then that should guide you on how to craft your research question. And then the last point here is that it should be measurable. We use terms that allow empirical investigation, okay? You must be able to quantify your outcome at the end of the day. Now, let's look at the different types of research questions. There are three possible types. We have the descriptive research question, the comparative, and the relational type, okay? The descriptive is common when we do exploratory research, where you are on a fact-finding mission. You want to ask what or how something could be done, okay? And again, you have the comparative type, where you examine the difference between groups, okay? And then we have the relational type of research questions, where we explore association, like the causal effect link between two variables. Very, very important. Now, the next point here is to look at how the research objective is generated. So the next point is to look at crafting our research objectives. Okay. Now, there are some key characteristics that must be consistent with our research objective. Number one, it should be specific. Okay. Our objective should be clearly stated, and it should be targeted at achieving a specified goal. It should be measurable. It should be achievable within realistic time, like I mentioned earlier, and it should be time bound. Now, what is the structure for our research objectives? Number one, usually we are expected to have one general objective, what some people describe as main objective. You can have a main objective, or you can call it aim. Some people call it aim. The aim of the study, the main aim of the study, the broad objective, depends on your institutional specification. You can have general objective. Now, it is from these general objectives that we can now come up with what we call specific objective. Now, it's important to view this like intending to build a house. If you intend to construct a house, to build a house, there are different ways you can break down the task. Okay, so building the house is the main objective. Now, the first specific objective may be about uh, working on the foundation. The next will be raising the building to lintel level, and then you talk of roofing or furnishing the house. Those will now be specific objectives to achieve what? The main objective, which is building the actual house. Now, it's important to ensure that our research objective directly address one research question. Okay, there must be synchrony between the research objective and the research question. Very, very important. So, number one, we want to come up with research objective, research question. And from research question, we generate an objective. Okay, the question is, what is? And the objective, the objective will now be to determine. Good. It is very important we ensure that synchrony. Now, so let's quickly look at the best practice tip, okay, for crafting our research objectives and the research question. This time around, the specific ones, okay? The first thing to note is that you first write the questions first, and then you convert them into objectives by replacing the question word, like the words, the how, the which, with the action verbs, like to determine, to assess, to examine. Very, very important. That is the very key word there. Now, let's look at how do we ensure that our research objective action verb actually aligns. Now, the next is to look at the research objectives. It's important to understand that our research objective, the choice of action verbs that we decide to select or to use, must align with the context of our study. We have 4 examples here: to assess, to evaluate, to determine, to examine. It's important to understand that these are not used randomly. There are certain things that must guide, or that usually guide, the usage of each of these phrases. Number one, to assess. It often flows with measurable concepts. Okay? You have taught some students and you want to establish the level of their comprehension. You want to assess, okay? To evaluate, you can only evaluate after an intervention. This is very common in epidemiological study, where you evaluate a system against the backdrop of the intervention made to improve that particular system. And again, we have the third example, to determine. This phrase is often used when our research focuses on a fact-finding mission, okay? You must have conducted an investigation, and then you want to determine as your research objective. And then you have to examine. To examine implies that you have gathered some information, you have gathered some data, And then you want to take a closer look at the facts even before you. Now let's look at some examples of vague research questions. I believe this will actually help us to much extent. Number one, what are the effects of education? Now this is too broad a research question. It doesn't specify the type of education, the population, and what effects we are out to look out for. Number two, how do people feel about politics? That is an example of an ambitious research question. The people here is undefined. The word feel is subjective and even very hard to measure. Third example, what is the impact of technology on society? In this case, this is an example of overly generalized research question. We have technology, we have society. These are vast topics without focus. In fact, you can not possibly answer this research question in a study. And the fourth example is, why is health important? This is an example of a trivial research question. Obvious answer. If you ask people why is health important, our research question must not be such that somebody can just answer without thinking twice. It must be a researchable research question, okay? It's an obvious question, no real research gap to actually explore. Let's look at further examples. The fifth example here, how can we improve agriculture? This is an example of a vague research question. It doesn't specify the agricultural sector, the location, and what improve actually mean in this context. Number six, what are the problems with transportation? Now, this is very unclear. There is need for specification on the type of transportation. We have three basic type of transportation: the road, the rail, the air, and of course we have the water medium transportation. And the context here is not even specified. Are we talking about urban transportation, rural, or specific region? Number seven, is social media bad? Now this is an example of a simplistic and subjective research question, and there's need for clarity in this case. Okay, the measurable dimensions are not clearly identified here. Are we looking at the effect of social media on mental health or productivity or even political awareness? These are very, very important when we craft research question. Okay, now let's see how we can improve on these examples of vague research questions and see the difference it will make. Number one, what are the effects of education? Now, we can modify that to have the effect of early childhood education on literacy level among primary pupils in Lagos State. Number two, how do people feel about politics? Okay, it could be modified to have, how do registered voters in Abuja perceive the transparency of the 2025 general election? Number three, what is the impact of technology on society? It could be modified to have, what is the effect of mobile banking technology on financial inclusion among rural farmers in Ogun State? So these are great examples of research question modification to bring in specificity and clear focus. Let's see more examples. Why is health important? We can modify it to have, how does access to primary healthcare services influence maternal mortality rate in rural Kano community? Again, we have, how can we improve agriculture? What farming practice can increase rice yield among smallholder farmers in Ebonyi State by at least 20%? Another example, what are the problems with transportation? What are the major causes of public bus delay in urban Lagos during peak traffic hour? And lastly, we have, is social media bad? How can we modify that? We can have, what is the relationship between Instagram use and academic performance among university students in Nigeria? So you can begin to appreciate that a well-written research question will actually give direction even to your study. Now let's look at how we can now transform or modify our research objective to come up with research question. We have the following examples. Number one, what is the prevalence of malaria among children under 5 in Lagos State? That is an example of a research objective. So we have the research question stated of to determine the prevalence of malaria among children under 5 in Lagos State. Another example, how does malaria prevalence differ between rural and urban community? Then we have the research question to compare malaria prevalence between rural and urban community. And the last example here, what is the relationship between bad net usage and malaria incidence? And then we have the research question to examine the relationship between bad net usage and malaria incidence. So these are the wonderful examples of how we can have our research objective transform to research question. Now, a quick recap before we close. Number one, it's important to start with your research, your problem statement. Identify a gap, issue, and phenomena to investigate. Your research question and objective, they are product of your research problem statement, okay? And number two, write research question. Write the research question from your research problem statement. You craft it using the interrogative pronoun, okay? The what, the how, the why, to what extent, okay, to frame your inquiry. And number three, you convert the questions to the objective. Convert the questions to the objective. And number four, you should ensure consistency. Each research question or research objective must synchronize with your research question. Your research question starts, and then you have your research objective. These are very important guidelines that will actually help us to have a well-refined proposal in the course of our research. Now, this is something you could use maybe as an undergraduate student to serve as a guideline or a postgraduate student. And if you are a research supervisor, please feel free to add input as to how you think this could be better pictured. Thank you very much. It is Research and Statistics once again. I'll see you again in my next video.